There are three groups of people who are likely to be interested in Star Wars Squadrons. If you're looking for a meaningful single-player game, then Star Wars Squadrons is definitely not the game for you. If you're looking for a fast-paced multiplayer Star Wars game, maybe reminiscent of the old X-Wing and TIE Fighter games, then maybe Star Wars Squadrons is going to be for you, but you better listen to what I have to say on that. And if you're looking for a really cool VR experience, then you're going to want to go and check out somebody else's review, because I don't have a VR setup, haven't tested it, but there are aspects of the game that are clearly designed for VR, and some aspects that are put in purely for VR, even though they don't really add any benefit to the game. Welcome to Mark's Game Reviews, everyone, and if you do find this video useful, then please do consider subscribing. Star Wars Squadrons puts you at the controls of various Rebel and Imperial starfighters and lets you engage in pitched battles against other players. There is a very short single-player campaign, but I want to emphasise that this feels more like a tutorial and an introduction to the different ships and their capabilities, rather than a meaningful single-player story and experience, but more on the campaign later. And once that is out of the way, it's all player versus player, 5 versus 5 matches. You engage in either just brief dogfights, or go into more pitched, small fleet battles that feels a little bit more like a MOBA, where you have to take out the enemy's small ships before building up to taking on their capital ship whilst defending your own. Each side has a pretty much mirrored selection of ships, from fast interceptors to general purpose fighters, bombers and utility ships to help out the team. And the more you engage in player versus player matches, the more you unlock for each ship, allowing you to totally customise its loadout and its abilities. The game does feature full VR support, for which it was clearly made and intended, and in some cases even built around. And also offers support for HOTAS, flight sticks, joysticks and controllers, and you can play with keyboard and mouse. Issues again with some of these, which I'll mention later. The main story is very short, and the player versus player action is kind of akin to the Call of Duty games, where it's very fast paced, you rush in, you probably die, you respawn and you get to go again. It's that sort of game, rather than the slow tactical dogfighting, which you might remember more from the original TIE Fighter games if you're old enough. Okay, let's talk about the graphics and sound before we get on to my likes and dislikes. And it's a bit of a mixed bag from the graphics. The ships, the battlefields, the explosions, the special effects, they all look really, really good. And then you get into the hangar and the briefing in between the campaign missions. And some of this looks nice, but some of the textures, some of the facial features on the characters, just some of the colours just don't seem to look quite right. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. It's all functional, it's all fine, but it feels like it's quite a contrast from the special effects and high-paced actions and beautiful backdrops you see in the space battles. But this bit doesn't matter, because it's the space battles that you're going to spend the vast majority of your time in the game, and those all look pretty good. Although there are some issues with a lot of background clutter a lot of the time, which might hamper you being able to track the enemies in the distance. The audio effects for this are also excellent all the way through. I love the special effects, the sound of the ship's engines and the ship's guns. There's some great music thrown in there too. Some of it you'll recognise from the Star Wars movies. Some of it probably made just for this game. Can't show you much, unfortunately, because I'm going to guess that it's all copyrighted. But it's pretty nice, and it gives you a good Star Wars vibe to the soundtrack. Okay, so what did I like about Star Wars Squadrons? Well, it does look and sound really nice. The sound effects and the soundtrack in particular, I really enjoyed. It does feel like a Star Wars games with the pew-pew of the lasers and the epic music coming in as well. That was all good. The graphics, yep, they're really nice when you're in a battle. I love the explosion and the laser effects, which that's what makes it a Star Wars battle game, after all. That was all pretty good. There's stuff in the space station in the hangars. Yeah, I could do without that, but then that bit of the game was clearly designed for VR people, where you could look around the hangar, although you can't move around the hangar, you can look around it, and getting that first-person perspective in VR when you're in conversations with some of the story characters, yeah, I can see why that was put in, but of course it's wasted on me because I don't have VR. I like the fact that there are different game modes for this now. There aren't many, but there are some. So once you've finished the main story campaign, and don't worry, we're coming on to that a little bit later, you've got the different PvP modes. I actually enjoyed the standard dogfight mode, which you have to do first. You have to play that so many times before you can unlock the fleet battles mode. But the standard dogfight mode I found a lot more enjoyable than I was expecting. You just go in 5 versus 5 and shoot the enemy players, and that was actually great fun. It was quick and simple, didn't go on too long, and it was just great fun. And then you've got the fleet battles mode, which are a bit more extended and drawn out, and I liken them to a MOBA, a bit like League of Legends, where you've got these outlying ships on both sides, and you have to attack the enemy fighters to gain the advantage there before you can attack the outlying ships, whilst hoping that they don't get to attack yours. And then if you push back on those, you can go and attack the main capital ship. That's the way it works, and you do get pushed back at some time and then have to defend your bits. I find these fleet battles can drag on a little bit, but they do add variety to the game, and if that's the bit that you like the most, then great, you've got the options of those here. I also really like that you can customise the ship loadouts. You play more PvP, you get more unlocks for those ship types, and you can change the rate at which the lasers fire, the range of the lasers. You can alter that a little bit to suit your playstyle, shall we say. The secondary loadouts, I like that quite a bit. It allows you to just customise the ship for its role. Like if you want a really fast interceptor for taking out the enemy fighters, you customise it for that. If you want to customise an assault ship for attacking the enemy capital ships, a big bomber, for example, the Y-Wing or the TIE bomber, well, you can customise it for that once you've got the unlocks. That's a nice feature, and I'm glad that's in the game. It's not necessarily a case of what you unlock is going to be better than what you have at the start. It's a different set of equipment, maybe for a different purpose or playstyle. It's how you want to load your ship up and enjoy it. Oh, and I should mention that you can switch between ships in a battle. If you go into a fight and you find that all your teammates are all in interceptors and you need to attack an enemy capital ship, well, you can still do it. But when you die, or you can fly back for repairs or to change the ship, you can change to a different ship to come back out in and maybe add a bit more utility to the battle. That's also a nice feature. Again, a bit like in first-person shooter games where you just change the class that you're playing once you're waiting to respawn. And there also seems to be a decent bit of balance between the Rebel and the Empire ships. For all there are differences, like the Rebel ships all have shields, TIE fighters and TIE bombers don't, for example. And you think, well, that's going to be a massive disadvantage. Well, no, the TIE ships seem to be made up for it with extra armour or hit points. And it seems to balance well. And they're mirrored as well. The two sides are mirrored. So each side has the fast interceptors, the general fighters, the bombers, the utility ships. And they've even added more ships in since the game was released. Just one on each side as far as I know, which is good. But yeah, it seems to be, as far as I can tell, balanced. Now, not necessarily balanced between the individual ship classes. I found the fast interceptors, the A-Wings, and I think is it the TIE interceptors, I found those way better to play and more fun, but maybe that was just my playstyle, I don't know. But I did seem to see an advantage in those. Okay, let's talk about the stuff I didn't like about Star Wars Squadrons, and we're going to start with that campaign, because I think it's only a campaign by name. It certainly isn't a long single-player experience, so if you're just looking at this game, you've got no interest in the player versus player, then just don't buy it, because the campaign isn't what you're looking for. For a start, you play both sides at the same time. You fly a mission as the Rebels, and then maybe fly a mission or two as the Imperials, and then switch back. And it's all set in the same story. They're not doing their own thing. One side is trying to achieve this goal, and the other side is trying to prevent it. So for one moment, you're trying to help this super-duper all-powerful ship escape so you can work on it and bring it back as a super weapon, as the Rebels this time. And then the next minute, you're trying to prevent its escape and shoot all those people down that you've just been talking to in the story as the Imperials. I find that doesn't work for me. I would rather have had two separate story campaigns rather than switching between the two, because I don't feel it adds for immersion. Which is why I say that this thing is there just as a primer and a tutorial for the different ship styles, because that's really all it is. You never feel like you're really taking part in some epic space struggle and battle in the story, because you switch sides all the time and you're trying to undo the work you've just done. So that bit doesn't work for me, and I'm a bit disappointed with that. I also had massive issues with the controls when playing this. Now, it can be played with keyboard and mouse or a gamepad. Both of those are a little bit tricky, partly because you have a ton of key bindings you need to keep on top of. You need buttons, so I used a flight stick, and I use a pretty damn good flight stick that works fine in all of the games where it's required, and in this, the whole thing was massively oversensitive and twitchy on the controls. Hugely. And this has been a problem for a lot of people who've bought the game, and not just with one particular model of flight stick either. They've got an in-game setting where you can turn down the sensitivity almost to nothing and increase the dead zone of the stick, which was a huge problem on launch as well. But for me, it's still far too twitchy. It's like you make a slight movement on the joystick and your ship just wings off to the left or right, and it means trying to just home in your targeting on fast-moving targets is particularly tricky. The way I got round this in the end was to install a third-party program called Joystick Curves, where you can actually map the sensitivity of your joystick curve as you move it left, right, up and down to a custom setting, and then the game reads off that instead, and that helped a bunch. And staying on the subject of the controls and the feeling of the starfighters and the way they fly, I felt that the whole thing was a bit too fast-paced and twitchy for my personal preference. Now you might like this, but I feel like this game and the way the starfighters respond is based on the newer Star Wars movies, where you see them doing handbrake turns in space and drifting and all sorts of things, rather than the older Star Wars movies where it looks more like a slower, more tactical dogfight of trying to get on someone's six. In this, you'll try and get on someone's six, and they'll suddenly do a handbrake turn and boost away and drift around sideways, and it looks crazy. A lot more faster paced. I didn't particularly appreciate that so much, but it might be your thing, so if that's good for you, then that's great. It just wasn't really for me. There were some issues I had with the visuals. For example, let's start with the TIE cockpit here. Look how much wasted space there is around the edge of the screen. It's like you're sat in a washing machine looking out the little door window at what's in front of you. And people say, yeah, but Mark, that's just the way the TIEs were designed. It was a terrible design that was never meant for anything. Look at this screenshot from TIE Fighter back in the 90s. And yes, their graphics look more basic, but look how much better the use of the screen space is. It's right up to the edges. You can see out. I found flying as the TIEs horrible in this. Fortunately, it didn't affect me too much because I had no interest in playing as the bad guys. I wanted to play in the Rebel Starfighters because, that's me. And also I felt like the engagement ranges were a little bit off on this, as in too far away. With the basic loadouts on most of the ships, you can start blasting at 1 kilometer range. At 1 kilometer range, an enemy TIE fighter or A-wing or X-wing looks like a pixel on the screen. It's far too far away, yet you can lock on and target them and hit them and destroy them, no problem. But you never actually see what you're shooting at those long distances. It's only when the ships get up really close that you can actually see the detail on them, and they do look great up close, but they tend to come past so fast and usually travelling sideways doing a drift or something. You never get to really see them up close very often. It's always long distance shooting at pixels. It's not a problem to pick them out because once you've targeted something, it's got a big box around it so you can follow it and you just line up on the box. But that's what you're doing most of the game. You're not shooting at Luke Skywalker and his X-Wing or someone flying a TIE fighter. You're shooting at a green or red box on the screen, and that's what you're looking at, and there's a pixel in the middle that you're hoping to hit. And I don't really appreciate that. I want to be able to see these ships up close. It's almost like you're sat too far back from the window of your cockpit, and everything just looks too far away. It's a bit of a wasted opportunity, I think. Just make things look bigger. I don't care what the range number says. Just make things look bigger so we can see what we're shooting at, so we can see the R2 droids being shot off the back of X-Wings or the rear stabilizers being shot off. That would be nice. This does lead to an issue on some maps that have so much background clutter, like funny asteroids or different coloured clouds in the distance, or just cluttered space, junk and debris, that the only thing you can see in the distance is the ship you've got targeted because it has a box around it. But you can't see, or you can't pick out easily, the swarms of other fighters milling around out there. I mean, you've got a radar, obviously, to help you with this, which is essential. That's what you tend to fly and control things by. You tend to stare at the radar to home in on stuff and target them and shoot them, rather than what you're looking at on screen. And what you're looking at on screen often looks beautiful, but it's so cluttered, it can be difficult to make out what's what, especially in the distance, and especially when you combine with that the fact that ships at 1 kilometre away are only a couple of pixels big. So I felt like that could have been handled a whole lot better. And finally, I don't know that there really is enough variety in this game to hold interest for very long. It hasn't held interest long for me, although I did enjoy what I played of it up to an extent. But really, it just becomes a case of, well, okay, we're just going to go into battle against 5 people and we're going to shoot them. Or we're going to go into battle against 5 people, some AI bots and some capital ships, and try and blow up their ships. But at the end of the day, how many times can you do the same thing over and over and over and again before you get tired of it? With me, not so much in this. You might be different. Again, this is just a personal opinion on that take and that aspect of the game. So is this game going to be for you? In summing up, it's all going to depend on whether you like fast-paced, first-person shooter style, rush in, die, respawn style of combat. Obviously, with less of the dying and respawning, the better you are at the game. But that's what it is. It's fast-paced combat. It's not slow and tactical and thought-out combat. It's just rush in, shoot, blow stuff up, repeat. And if you love that, and if you like the newer Star Wars movies, you'll probably like this. If you're looking for something more reminiscent of the old X-Wing and TIE Fighter games from the 90s, you might be a little bit disappointed in how this flies and handles and plays, although it does look very pretty, I will give it that. So overall for me, this is a 7 out of 10. It does things pretty well, it's not overly priced, but how long do we want to keep playing it for? That's the question.